Welcome to Ultimate DIY, where you learn to be your own handyman. And today we're going to replace some rotten soffit. This customer is having the roof replaced later this week. We got to walking around looking at the home and realized that he has an exposed soffit around the house, and some of it is rotted. And it has rotted all the way through the roof decking and into that soffit siding. If you don't replace that before the roofers get here, what they're going to do is they're not going to replace that part of the siding. They're going to leave it like it is, and they're going to just put the roof decking, new roof decking, over the top. And now you'll have to cut those squares out later, which creates a big mess. It doesn't go in correctly, and now you're not going to be even. It's going to look awful. So I'm going to go up there, go ahead and pull the shingles off that section today, pull off the old roof decking that's rotted, cut it with a saw, get it nice and square, and then I'm going to pull off the actual soffit siding that goes underneath, and that way I can check the thickness and make sure what size that I need to go get. I will run to a Home Depot or a Lowe's, whatever's closest, pick that up, come back and install it, and then we will put the new roof decking on and have it ready for the roofers. That way it'll be paintable, ready, it'll be at the same level, everything will be done before they get here. So let's get to the job site and let's see how tough this is going to be.
So once on the job site, the very first thing I notice is this area, which has a lot of rot. This doesn't just happen from moisture getting underneath. There's got to be a leak up on the roof. Up above the rotted area is also a big opening where rodents can climb through and get into the attic. You can also see the rust marks where water's been running down onto the trim. This area also has some kind of an issue with the siding, and it's leaking coming through, and it's destroyed this trim piece that covers the edge of the siding all the way down the front of the house. So the first order of business is going to be to rip some shingles off, and let's see what's going on underneath. All you need is a hammer and a simple pry bar to get the shingles up and out of your way. We're starting to see the rot area now, and we can tell it's rotted all the way from the top to the bottom, just like I suspected. Now we need to figure out where it's coming from. The OSB in this area is non-existent. I have to get all of the metal flashing loose and out of the way. The roofers, when they come, will reflash the area and seal it as well. You will also have to remove the old drip edge, and in my case, the roofers will be installing all new drip edge along the whole perimeter of the home. Okay, with the drip edge off, now it's time to remove as many of the nails as I can and get ready to start pulling the plywood out. Also, you can see just how the wood just scrapes out with a hammer here. It's kind of crazy. Okay, so now you can see the true extent of the damage where it's rotted all the way through, and the leak was actually coming from this valley where it meets this lower part of the roof. If you watch until the end, when the roofers get up here, they're going to cut that back open and allow the shingles to go up underneath it like they're supposed to be, so you don't have this leak at this junction. Okay, so now it's just a matter of prying the plywood pieces loose, but you have to be very careful with those rafter tails. Notice how they're wiggling as I'm prying, so you have to be very gentle so that you don't break those. That could be disastrous for your day. Now when you throw these pieces into the yard, so you don't have to come down off the ladder, be sure you try to aim the nails down into the ground. That way somebody doesn't walk along behind you and step on a nail. And as soon as you have time, bend all the nails over with a hammer. So the little trim piece that your drip edge sets on, I'm cutting that back so that I don't have to replace the whole thing. And you have to be very gentle here as well. Just keep wiggling the plywood back and forth and then pulling out nails as you can, and it'll make it a lot easier for the piece of plywood to come out. Prying up against the house was not easy, so I went ahead and used the reciprocating saw to cut the ends of the nails to make it a little easier to get the last piece of plywood out. Finally, I have the last piece loose. So now all I need to do is clean up all the rafter tails and get the plywood ready to remount. The multi-tool works really well here to try to clean off any old caulk that's around the rafter tail so that when you put new caulk on, it doesn't interfere and you get a good bond. So the next step will be to take cabinet grade plywood and cut length times width. You really don't need a track saw, table saw, anything like that. Just make your line and take your time. Follow the line with your circular saw. And remember to always cut to the left of your line. Now just slide it into place and start nailing it off. Use 3 to 3.5 inch framing nails to make sure that the plywood never comes loose. And obviously, just make sure you're hitting the rafters. And if you're like me and have allergies, this might be a good time to put a mask on. Notice all the dust that's flying around in the video. If you're having issues getting up against the house, you can also use a palm nailer here. You're going to see the roofer use a palm nailer a little bit later in the video. Now I'm going to try to close off that rat opening a little better than what was there before. So I'm going to go ahead and use 2 different pieces of OSB. It makes it a little bit easier to cut that angle and get it the way I want it. I'm also going to use some foam to help fill in the openings before the flashing goes into place. And if you really feel like you need to, you can even mix a little steel wool in with the foam. Rodents hate steel wool. Decking is now 100% installed. You will also notice the foam that I told you about. I did fill in. Don't worry about the flashing. That's going to be corrected by the roofer. Now I have to look underneath, and I will caulk all of these seams and pre-paint so that it'll go on nice. Now it's time to try to get this trim piece off that covers up the edge of the siding. This is also another delicate location because if you hit too hard trying to break it loose, you're going to break the bottom of the siding. So if you'll take a knife and pre-score it, it helps quite a bit to get it loose so that you can use a pry bar and pull it off. I also use the multi-tool quite a bit to help cut through. There are a few spots that the bottom of the siding was eaten up a little bit, but we're going to fill that in with a little bit of caulk and new paint. You shouldn't be able to notice that. We'll have to figure out how come the water is getting into this area though in a second, and I have a feeling it's going to be up in that upper corner on the bottom of the actual siding. This was actually a very tedious part of the project, and I cut a lot of the video out just so it wouldn't bore you to death. But you have to go very slow, like I said, or you will damage that siding, and then you're going to be replacing sheets of siding. So at this point, it's just a matter of installing the new smart siding trim and using brad nails to hold it into place. We'll also go back and caulk all the seams, which gives it a lot more support. I chose not to use any liquid nails here to hold the piece against the siding, because if you ever have to replace the siding, you'll definitely destroy it pulling that trim piece off later. All the seams are now caulked. It didn't take too long to figure out what the problem is with the damaged area on the siding in the front of the house. If you look closely, you'll see that there's actually 2 layers of siding here. And the original siding has flashing that goes underneath it and is supposed to drain all the way down and come out the end, right where you're looking now. But what happened was somebody changed out the siding. They didn't actually change it. They added a whole new layer. And instead of putting new flashing like they should have done, they left the flashing attached the way it was. So now the water runs all the way down and it has nowhere to go but in between the 2 pieces of siding. So there's 2 ways to fix this issue. You can either pull off all the siding and redo it the way it's supposed to be and reflash it, or I'm going to have to build a dam through this area using something like through the roof sealant, so that the water will be diverted away from this edge. I'm going to have to also use some good wood filler to fill in this location and make it look somewhat presentable. And I explained to the customer it will never be 100% like brand new siding, but we can make it blend. That's a lot cheaper alternative than trying to go ahead and replace the entire siding. And we also have the issue of time. We have roofers scheduled to be here first thing in the morning. Now for projects like this, I like to use Durham's. You just mix it up. Now I will tell you, don't put too much water in right away. Just put a little bit of water and keep mixing it. You want it to be somewhat pasty, like a real creamy peanut butter. If you get it too runny, you're not going to be able to get it to stay in the location you're wanting to work with. Now you can use blenders for this, like I like to use the old egg beater blenders, but on little repairs I'll just use a taping knife. Now I'll put quite a bit on to get this started, and then I'll go back with a rag and try to clean up around the edges so that I can get some of my texture back so that the spot will not be quite as noticeable. Now I'm going to do all of this, paint it, get it ready for the roofers, but I'll ultimately come back after the roof is put on and I'll put one more coat of this on and one more coat of paint just to help it look better. I just don't want to go too overboard here and make it perfect, and the roofers are going to scratch it and tear it all up anyway. And I'll probably want to put some more sealant around this area once the roofers have left. Most likely you're going to end up going back and putting a second coat of caulk on everything. The first one will generally shrink up some, especially if you have any big gaps. Now I generally do not put caulking up against the house on the brick. You'll notice those are left alone. You need to be able to allow water to escape. You don't want to hold water into the home. One of the final steps before the roofers get here is painting. You want to paint now because it's a lot easier to paint at this point than to try to get around all of their drip edge and all without making a mess. If I'm painting large areas, I will use my paint sprayer, but on small areas like this, roller works great. You don't have to mask off a lot of stuff if you're very careful with drips and spills. Now that the putty has actually dried, I'm going to go ahead and use a little patch paint type mixture to put over the top because it dries really quickly, so that I can paint this area as well. Now I'm putting a layer of paint over the top of this just to protect it. Keep in mind that I'm going to go back over it with some more putty once the roof is complete to kind of help even everything out and make it look better. So before I build the diversion dam, I've got to go ahead and remove this section of the metal drip edge so that I can get in there and build that dam correctly. This is what I was talking about. It's called through the roof sealant, which is extremely good. I use it a lot on metal roofs. But what I'm going to do is put a lot of it down in this bottom area, spray a little water on it, and tool it down in there to build up a dam where water cannot run behind it. Now when they shingle, you literally have to find the end of a shingle and you start your dam at that point and you work it down so that way the water will not be able to get behind it. So I will put another layer of this on once the shingles are up and complete and finished, as well as going ahead and putting another layer of that putty over the wood patch area just so that it looks better, and to do a final coat of paint. So this is fast forwarding a couple of days. The roof is already on. I'm going to show you that process in a minute, but I just wanted you to see that I did go ahead and add more of the putty to fill in the holes and kind of level things out. And I'm going to put some more of that through the roof sealant along the edge up above as well. But I'm doing this just to give it a more finished look. I'll get it all on there, let it dry, come back and sand. I also use my finger a little bit to tool it, especially through the groove that I've tried to make to where it simulates the original factory groove. I give it a good hour to dry and work on some other projects and then come back and start sanding, trying to clean it up and make it blend. Now I don't want it super smooth because I want some of the roughness to kind of simulate the wood, but I don't want jagged edges of putty sticking out all over the place. Now it's time to just do a little final coat of paint to make it look right and blend in. Now I ended up painting this whole little section of siding because the original paint didn't look the same because over time it fades out. You may find that when you're starting to paint either inside or outside a house. Now this customer actually had some of their old paint from the last time they painted. If you don't have that, you'll have to get like a quarter-size chip and take it up to your Home Depot or Lowe's or your painting supply store so they can try to match the color for you. And if the paint is faded, that might actually be a better option. That is, if you want it to match exactly at this point in time. Now it's time to go ahead and complete the dam that keeps the water from getting back into the siding. I started at the bottom, cleaned all of that up to make sure water couldn't run around the back side and run inside the siding from down there. And then I ended up building the dam up quite a ways up the roof so that water would divert away from this area. Pro tip here, when you're dealing with silicone type products, you can use a little bit of water in a spray bottle and tool it. You can use your finger, you can use a popsicle stick, whatever works for you best. If you're going to use your finger, wash it off almost immediately when you're done, or you'll have a hard time getting it off later. It's very sticky. If you're dealing with just regular caulk, you can just use a rag and a little water, and it comes off extremely easy. But silicone is 100% waterproof, and it keeps water from getting into areas around bathtubs, shower enclosures, anything in a kitchen or in a situation like this. So now it is pretty much ready for the roofers. You can see at the top some of the paint's still trying to dry. It's still wet. Even the area where the patch is still wet. But everything is pretty much now ready for them to come and get everything installed. So here they are. There's 12 roofers in total, not counting their supervisor. And the scenes you're seeing was done within probably an hour and a half, 2 hours. They had the entire roof stripped down. This is a 3,400 square foot home. So they're extremely fast. Now, some in the very beginning here, I kind of speed up a little bit, but most of the gun action that you're seeing is real time. These guys are very quick.
Bebecita, ponte a bailar, ponte a twerkear. Esta cumbia sucia te la voy a dedicar. Móntate en mi whip, te perro por fuera lobby. Este es un Benz, baby, no ningún jalopy. Abriéndote la puerta como todo un caballero. Enrolamos uno fresco, aunque uno en el cenicero. Baby, soy tu carnicero, ya viene el aguacero. Mami, ponte naki, ya sabes lo que quiero. Te toco este puntito como todo un ingeniero. Te habla Bambi, baby, el rache sonidero.
A mí me gusta como tú lo mueves. Eres una diabla, me encantan tus poderes. Soy tu cachorrito, aunque no me peles. Quisiera saborear esa boca venenosa. Ay, mami.
One of the things that I noticed right away is that everybody had a job to do and they knew what that job was. Whether they were a helper and they're holding shingles and handing them to the actual roofer, or whether it's the guy down on the ground picking up the nails and the trash as it falls. They all knew what to do and they all kept working pretty much constant through the entire day with just a small break for something to eat. They actually did not finish this job till about 10 o'clock at night, but it is a 3,400 square foot home. One of the techniques that they use that I did like is, if you watch this real close, they'll take a shingle and put it across the edge and make a good straight edge with that shingle and use it as a guide to cut the ends of their shingles off. And I thought that was pretty interesting how they did that. Now this is the first water damaged area that we worked on, and you'll notice what he's doing here is he's cutting a wedge out where the two roofs meet, which is called a valley, and he's doing that so that he can actually slide a shingle all the way up underneath that area and then overlap it with several other shingles, so that way water can never get back into that area again. Right now he's cutting it so that he can, so the first thing he has to do is start at the very bottom and start shingling up to that area. He's also flashing as he goes, and later in the day he'll come back and he'll actually put roofing tar around all of that flashing as well. One of the number one rules in shingling is to always stagger your seams. You'll notice how he's placing a shingle there and he's fixing to nail it in. The one that goes above it, he will overlap that seam. He'll lift up the shingle and slide it underneath, and he'll apply his nails. He's also putting starter strips all the way up the rake so that that tar strip can hold the edge of the shingles down if there's a big windstorm. Gives it extra protection. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is if you look at his knife closely, he's using a hook blade so that he can cut through the front of the shingle. If you use a regular flat blade and try to cut on those grains, the actual rock that is on the top of your shingle, it'll dull the blade really quickly. Now here he's doing what I was suggesting earlier. If you're having a hard time, use a palm nailer to get up in there, and you'll shoot one nail at a time, but you can get in very tight spots. Now he is figuring out the shingle where he made that notch and cut it out. He's going to cut a V in this shingle so that it can slide all the way up and around that area so water can not get inside of there. And he'll play with it a few times here to get it just right, and then he'll nail it in. See, he's making it just a little wider here. Now he's going to slide it up there, get it all the way up as high as he can get it to where also his reveal on his lower shingle looks correct. This area was a little tricky and took a little time. And when I say reveal, that's going to be the spacing between each shingle that's exposed. In his case, it looks like it's about a 5 or a 6 inch, maybe 5 1/4 inch reveal. So he's getting it just right, and he's getting that shingle all the way up in that opening. And you'll see in a second when he adds all the other shingles, it's going to cover that area. Now, before he can do that, he has to go ahead and put his drip edge on that side, and that's what he's doing right now. So even at this point, he still has to use a starter strip to help hold everything down. That tar at the very end is going to hold it. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're dealing with a valley is you do not want to get within a certain distance of that center of that valley. Looks like he's staying about 12 inches or so off of the valley, but he's going to weave everything in, and it's very tricky here because you have to keep your shingles straight. And you'll see what I'm talking about. So as you're going up from the right, he's trying to keep that line straight, but he's got to weave it up underneath that valley. When he comes from the left side, he's going to have to keep those straight with the left. It's a little bit tricky, and it comes with experience and time. Now he's got it up there, and you'll notice at the very front of that is a big hood that actually covers that whole area. There's no way water can get into that area now. The only way it could possibly get in there is if he put a nail too close down into that valley. The rat hole is pretty well gone. He does have the flashing up, but it does not have the tar around it yet. Now, I did find this situation a little interesting because, first of all, the eave he's on is not extremely strong. I sat there and watched it shaking up and down. There's not a lot holding it into place like you would, probably want or expect. Also, he's having to use a rope to hold himself up because it's extremely steep and slippery there, and there's nothing to hold on to on the left or the right. He has to take all of the shingles off, get all the tar paper off, and then he's going to have to re-tar paper it and re-shingle it. And this is the area that I had the front leak. So I've already explained to him not to remove that dam that I've got built there. You'll also notice in this one that we had some rot damage on the edge. So the far right of the home also had a little bit of water damage on this left corner, but most of it was contained to the OSB. Had a little bit in the actual plywood siding underneath, but we didn't have another piece to put on there right now and could not hold the roofers up. So they covered it back up. I will tell you that this damage happened from the gutter system. You need to keep the leaves and trash out of your gutters because it'll fill up and that water will go right into your siding and possibly even do damage like what this one did. Now, he had to cut this notch out here the same as the other roofer did on the other side of the house, and he's having to weave these shingles up underneath it to get it to where it seals really well. Now, I thought this was pretty interesting how they used a rope to go across the pool to hold the tarp out of the water. The majority of the nail gun close-ups that are next are all real time. Notice how quick these guys are with the nail gun. You do this every day for a living, you're going to get extremely fast. So that the pads that these guys use to kneel on not only save your knees, they save your back, and they even help with the shingles, especially in the summertime. The summertime, these shingles get so hot that as you're walking on them, it starts taking the granules off of the top of the shingle. So now this section is on the other side of the house, and you've got a whole group of guys here. You have the group that you just saw, and we have another group of guys still on the front of the home. A lot of them are working. This house is a little bit interesting because you notice they have ridge vent, but they also have the vent boxes, or I call them turtles. So in a normal situation like this, you would have soffit vents around the eaves of the house, but this is an exposed eave home, and they have a very hard time getting that to work here. So they are using the vent boxes and gable vents to try to get fresh air into the home. The problem is that you're pulling more hot air at the top and not pulling the cool air from down at the bottom. So now this is the completed roof the next day. Looks pretty decent. You are going to notice that there are a lot of the shingles still trying to stick up. That's kind of normal. It has to heat up to make that tar start laying flat and pull the shingle down flat. But that'll happen over the next couple days. We have several 85, 90 degree days in a row coming up.